Lorraine, the first question is, if there is one difference that you can see since the legislation was introduced, what would you say it is?
The one difference, can you hear me? Yeah? Yeah. The main difference, I would say, is the recognition that schools cannot do learning on their own, that they have to do it alongside parents. I think that's the one. It's taken lots of things to achieve that, and I think hopefully you've had a flavour of some of those things that we've tried to do. But I would say that that's the one difference that I think that we've actually achieved now, is that we have to do this together. There is no way going back now, and the changes in the world have actually given us even more of a. I don't think we were aware of those in 2006 as much as we are today. The challenges that parents face. I think bringing up a child today in this world is probably more difficult than it ever has been. The uncertainty around our children and the life that they will lead, I think, is probably more than it ever has been before, the changes that are happening in the world. So, yeah, I think that's the one thing that I think is that the recognition, the understanding that we have to educate our children together, and that means that we all have to pull together to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Then for the Minister, how to deal with bullying by teachers, principals and Board of Management. What to do when the school just won't cooperate with the parents?
This is a difficult task because, first of all, establishing it, that it's actually happening. Secondly, speaking as a parent and a grandparent, there's the natural defensive position that some parents reluctantly adopt, which is not to pursue or to progress a particular complaint for feeling that there will be some kind of retribution visited upon them. And if there isn't a choice of a school, then you're really caught into a difficult situation. I think the change in the culture within the department, and particularly within the inspectorate, and I acknowledge here the presence of the, I was going to say new Chief Inspector, but reasonably new Chief Inspector Harold Heaslop, where, quite frankly, to have got amongst a very conservative profession, the teachers at primary and secondary level, a willingness now to accept unannounced SNAP inspections, to call in without sort of sending a signal in advance, and to, as I said in my formal remarks prepared by Tom Deegan, that where a school survey with parents shows that the parents do not feel that they're being adequately involved in the school system, that this is formally brought by the inspector to the attention of the school authorities. That's a big change, and I think we have to build on that change and build on that change of openness and culture. The one other thing I would say to you is Section 30 of the Teaching Council legislation, which was first enacted back in 2001 and sort of went live in 2006, if my memory serves me correctly. This is the provision where, in order for a school teacher to be paid out of taxpayers' money for doing their job as a teacher, they have to be registered with the Teaching Council, and in order to register with the Teaching Council on an annual basis, they have to give evidence of having done some form of CPD, continuous professional development. Now, this is in line with architects, solicitors, doctors and everybody else, but it does hold out the possibility, and I would invite the MPC to explore the possibility with the Teaching Council as to how they can use that mechanism of professional accountability to hold a teacher to account, and therefore bypass the fear that I'm going to actually have to confront the management of the school or the Board of Management of the school or the group of teachers there. There will have to be protocols established around how a complaint can be lodged, but if you complain about Miss So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so directly to the Teaching Council as distinct from to the principal, where quite frankly you may not get a satisfactory response, you're intervening at a very critical point of exchange, and that is the right of that teacher to re-register and so maintain their salary. Of course, the council will refer the matter back to the school, but there's now a third party in this process. It's not going to be you and the school and your sense of, well, if I kick up a fuss, where are my other two kids going to go if they're coming to this school? And and also, and I said this in the Dáil when the legislation was going through, and it is now being completed, we don't have to confuse staff room solidarity, which is an understandable workplace response when one is threatened that the rest gather around to defend, and quite frankly, in some cases, defending the indefensible. Previously I was Minister for Labour, and we changed legislation in relation to one-person disputes, where some person could stand in front of an industrial plant with a picket and bring everything to a close. The unfair dismissals legislation and a whole host of other things took that away from invoking the solidarity of the workforce. So in that space, I think we can get some room to explore those things, and I would strongly suggest that the National Parents' Council at primary and post-primary level look at just how that might work.
Thank you very much. Next question now for Lorraine. Lorraine, what were the greatest obstacles or challenges that you witnessed in the process?
I think we probably had a very conservative education system where teachers, as some parents described it to me not that long ago, their school was their castle, and they were very much wanted to manage their school along with their teachers, and that culture is probably the biggest obstacle that we've had to change, in as much that getting schools and teachers to open up to see parents as partners. That kind of professionalism that you get around any profession in some ways that we know best. Teachers, I remember in the early days saying to me, I didn't come into teaching to deal with parents. I came into teaching to teach children. That, I suppose it's that attitudinal change, that cultural change that we've had to really chip away at, and that's probably the biggest obstacle, because you don't change things like that with legislation. And I think that's a really important thing. Legislation helps because it sets the bar. Inspections help because there's accountability there. But changing attitudes and changing culture, I think, were probably the biggest, and I would admit the most challenging thing for me to deal with in the process that I've been through.
Can I just add to then that, Lorraine, how did you change attitudes and culture?
Winning hearts and minds, I think, probably. Relationships is crucial. I really think that I think one of the things that I felt very, very strongly, and I still do today, is that this is a partnership. This is not a them and us. This is children we're talking about. And the most important thing for us and for schools is to do the best for children. So the starting point was the right point. Schools want to do the best for the children, the pupils in their school. And I have no doubt about that. We might have challenges that we have to deal with. That the Minister's just mentioned one of those challenges, but I think the starting point is that we want to do the best thing for children. So we had to try and bring people with us to make sure that parents were not seen as a threat, and I think they were. I think parents were always seen as a problem. There's one of I don't know if any of you read the Times Educational Supplement, but when you're in education, it's one of those publications that you look at. But in the UK and the English version of the Times Educational Supplement, they actually have had a column, and I'm not sure it's still there, but what's your worst parent story? I don't know, is it still there, Harold? I think, and I just, that type of thing dismayed me when I saw it. Thankfully, we don't have that in the Scottish version of and I think I would challenge if we did. But yeah, I think relationships and bringing people with me. I'm very much a people person, and I do think that I don't want to set parents up against schools. And I think I've been very firm on that all the way through. And so I think that's at the foundation. It has to be a partnership. We can't tell teachers how to do their job properly, and they can't tell us as parents how to do our job properly. But we have to have a meeting of minds, and I think that's for me, that's important.
Thank you very much. Minister, when are the cuts for children with special needs, such as resource hours and SNAs, going to stop? Inclusion is a great word, but needs to be put into practice urgently.
It'll start to stop when we regain our economic sovereignty, which we're not scheduled to do until the start of 2014. And that's assumed that the Greeks don't create havoc tomorrow for us. in an election where, if they do leave the euro, quite frankly, nobody knows what the consequences of it might be. Ireland exports 80% of what we produce. If world markets are in turmoil, our ability to recover, and we are the third highest exporting country in the whole of the European Union. But let me just tell you what's happened specifically in relation to the area that you refer to. The number of special needs assistants has been capped at 10,575. Now, they're dealing with a larger number of pupils, obviously, because some SNAs are displayed and related across a number of different clients. But I asked Teresa Griffin, the Chief Executive of the NCSE, National Council for Special Education, had the incidence of dependency or requirement for SNAs more or less plateaued within the 500,000, give or take, cohort at primary level and 350,000 at secondary. And her answer is yes. And on Wednesday of this week, we announced the allocation of the SNAs and the resource teachers and special teachers. From experience, they kept back last year 10% of the total allocation in the event of emergencies or new cases presenting. We've been able to reduce that retention from 10% down to something closer to about 5%. These were all for valid applications. On the resource teaching side, where an assessment of the allocation of resource teaching time over certain areas of learning difficulties, which was drawn up as far back as 1993, and an awful lot of work and specialist research, and you mentioned the benefit and value of research, Lorraine, yourself. This is 20 years old, virtually, allocation of time between different kinds of cognitive difficulties and learning difficulties. It's not an area of which I have any specialist knowledge. But what we did last year to keep the numbers intact, and we're talking about in total just under 9,500, to keep those numbers intact, we had to get, in effect, more with less. So instead of, for every 60 minutes that they were allocating as a learning support teacher, that was reduced from 60 minutes down to, it was reduced by 10%, which was 6 minutes. And we've had to reduce that again by 5%, which is 3 minutes. And quite frankly, what I've asked the resource teachers and people related to it to go the extra mile, to actually work longer and harder. Most people in the private or in the public sector are doing that. The report on the Croke Park Agreement has shown an extraordinary increase in productivity in the system. So there's two things. Economic framework hopefully will improve for us. We have to look at how best we're using the resource that we have. Let's go back on the resource teaching learning side, see how we can do that. And secondly, to see if the allocation of the breakdown of the typical hour, it meets now current educational needs, and whether people can be more productive. And one final thing I would say, and I note, Lorraine, that you indicated yourself that you have a child, I don't know what age the person is now.
16.
16. So it is clearly, and we're all parents in one way or another, clearly very challenging. And what has happened in the Irish side is that for also the reasons to which anybody can relate to as a parent, families and parents and relatives of a child measure the tangible support that they are getting from the system by whether they have an SNA allocated to them or not. And if the SNA, who's not a teaching assistant, but a special needs assistant to support the non-educational aspect of that young person's life, if they succeed in doing their job, like for example in toilet training, and that child can now in fact manage themselves okay in the school system, if the CEO then says, well, we've achieved this independence for this particular person, therefore we can allocate some time of that SNA to somebody else, it is seen emotionally, not rationally, but it's seen emotionally and held very passionately, you are withdrawing some support from my child. And as one of our senior officials who's now moved to another section in the special needs area in the department said, in some ways, you can understand why the parents want to hold on to what they have, because it's the only tangible manifestation of support that they're getting. And if they're only spending 14% of their time in school, they're very challenged elsewhere as well. But as this person said to me over a year ago, it's very hard for a 9 or 10-year-old to make friends in the playground if they're being accompanied by an adult all the time. So it's getting that balance right, getting the resources, getting the application of the resources, fine-tuning how effective to deliver those resources at a time when we're all challenged. Thank you.
Thank you. Lorraine, how do you know that outcomes for children's learning have been improved since the legislation was introduced?
That's a very good question, isn't it? I think it's very difficult to pin down one change as having improvements for children, particularly at a time where so many things are changing. And so I'd love to sit here and say I can make a direct link between parental involvement and achievement of children and show that with hard statistics. And I can't do that across the board, there's no doubt about it. What we have seen in very small-scale projects, and we've funded small-scale projects over the last 3 or 4 years, we have seen, so if there's been a focused project where we've actually worked with parents alongside perhaps particularly challenged children or particularly vulnerable children or children whose literacy perhaps needed to improve, we've managed to map that through and see the outcomes in terms of literacy improving. There's been a Save the Children funded project in Scotland. It's called the FAST project. It's actually a global project. I don't know if you've got any projects from FAST here in Ireland, but again working intensively with parents and again seeing the difference in terms of literacy and numeracy achievement. So we've got small scale projects. I think our inspectorate would probably also be able to give lots of examples of where when they have seen improvements in schools over a period of time of where they've actually been working much more closely with parents, and particularly when parents are much clearer as to what it is that they should be doing around children's learning. So in terms of whole scale, Charles Deforge is the person to go to. He's got much more resources than I have and has done work. What he proved, and it's really interesting, one of the things he told us when he came to Scotland, that the only thing that gives the same difference to children's achievement or greater difference, in fact, as parental involvement is one-to-one tuition. Now, no government, you've just heard the challenges that you have here in Ireland in terms of resources. We've got those same challenges in Scotland. No government can afford to fund one-to-one tuition on a long-term basis. It's just impossible. But the only other initiative that makes the difference, that makes such a difference, is working with parents. And Charles Deforge has actually managed to map that out. So I would strongly commend his research to you to get that proof.
Okay, thank you. Minister, a question on religion in schools. If the Christian religion is removed from our school system, how will children have the basis to accept or reject any other set of beliefs, i.e. what will fill the vacuum?
The Archbishop of Dublin, Dr. Jim Martin, has, in referring to the maturity of Catholics within his own denomination, has described them as being, and this is in no way meant to be insulting, and I know he didn't mean it to be insulting himself, was that the level of Catholic theological comprehension amongst very many Catholics in Ireland was at a very immature level. Wasn't the phrase he used, it was slightly more pejorative. I don't believe that you can be an educated person without understanding religion, without having a knowledge of religion, not just Christianity. It's a topic in which I have a great interest because I followed a long journey in relation to it, and I'm one of the people that I remember at the time when Vatican II was being published and I was a 17-year-old, was the Christian theologian Hans Kung. Hans Kung has written 3 seminal works on the history of the 3 monotheistic faiths in their chronological order: Judaism, Christianity and Islam. And he has said in the mantras of all 3 of them, there can be no peace between nations until there's peace between religions. There can be no peace between religions until there's dialogue between religions. And there can be no dialogue until there is a fundamental understanding of the history, or I would paraphrase it, a fundamental respect for the other and for diversity. So I don't want, as I have been accused, to remove religion from the public sphere or from the classroom. But there is a very big difference between teaching religion in a Catholic school, teaching the tenets of the Catholic Church, and recent surveys in the Irish Times would suggest that there's a gap between what people's perception and understanding of those tenets are and what the Church teaches. But there's a big difference between that and faith formation inside in the classroom. And if you take it that out of our 3,200 primary schools, 1/3 of them are small schools, which means that there are double classes. So you could, in second class and first class, be there for the faith formation period twice in a row, and similarly for confirmation in fourth and fifth class. I don't think we have that time availability if we look at the other things that we're not doing as well as we would like to do, the literacy and numeracy test. In the Reformed Church, largely the Church of Ireland Anglican tradition of Christianity, but it does include Presbyterians and other Reformed Christian churches, because they have different practices in terms of their own beliefs and practices. Christianity is taught in those Protestant church schools, but faith formation takes place in Sunday school. There's a debate within the Catholic Church at senior level as to whether faith formation should be the function of the parish or should be the function of the school itself. My personal view, but obviously this is something that parents will have to choose for themselves, is that faith formation should take place outside the classroom. And I would refer you, if you want to, because we had it recently, Cathy Sheridan, the Irish Times feature correspondent reporter, wrote a piece about 6 weeks ago, in which she entitled it in the Saturday Review section, "The Communion Conundrum." And if anybody has questions around that and around the role of it, I would refer them to that. We have increasingly an emerging issue, and that is, what is the attitude of the school employer, the teaching training colleges, and young individuals? Is it really what we want in our school system for teachers, class teachers, to be actually teaching faith formation in which they do not believe themselves? We've no mechanism where they can opt out of that at the moment. We're having a review of the teacher training colleges. We have 5 in this country at primary level, and I'm confining my remarks to primary because of the nature of this conference. But that review, which has been commenced by the Higher Education Authority, will probably, and I don't want to anticipate it, but one of the issues that they have to address is, I want primary school teachers who qualify in our system to be capable of being employed in any school, whatever the ethos of that school is, and to be able to teach the religious formation part of it, understanding in that school, irrespective of where they've come from. That is not the case at the moment. Up until recently, there was only one, self-evidently, because we're talking about a system that's 180 years old nearly. It was established in 1831, as you know. So this is what the Forum on Patronage and Pluralism is all about. Some people have characterized it as trying to remove or to hunt out, etc. No, it's to respect and celebrate diversity, and to look at the necessity to understand religion and its role in society. And there's always been belief systems. You can't cross this land without seeing, from Newgrange right up to the present day, the spiritual dimension of buildings and monuments, of artefacts of one kind, some of which we understand, some of which we don't. But clearly the spiritual dimension is very strong in all of us. What form it should take and what formalised form it takes is a matter in a free society that people should be free to choose. And that is my own view. What I want is, next Wednesday we'll be having the stakeholders, including yourselves, Anya, where we're responding to the outcome of the patronage forum, and we will be indicating our own governmental position and inviting the stakeholders to reflect on these issues, some of which I've just outlined in detail, with the view to formulating a white paper on policy, because of the 3,200 primary schools that we have, 17 of them are located in areas where the population is static. In other words, there is no necessity for another building or an enlarged building, and where under the Constitution, which you cited on at the very beginning, the local children, we oblige the parents to send their children to school. They suffer penalties if they don't, and the Constitution guarantees primary education to all of our young people. So we have to find a new programme and a new way of accommodating minority young children and their parents in a school where the dominant ethos is going to be, for just over half of the schools, Roman Catholic. And I have to say in conclusion that the Catholic Church has been, through Michael Drum and through others, has been very positive in their response to the progress that has been made so far.
Thank you. Lorraine, what is the most fundamental change parents can make in the home to help their children's education?
Talk to your children. I think one of the things that we had to change attitudes around was we were not expecting parents and to be teachers at home. You know, that's what our schools are for. There's lots, you know, teachers go to training, go to university to learn how to teach. But what parents can do at home is talk to their children. And I think, particularly in secondary school, I think that is underestimated hugely, the value that parents can have around talking to their child about their learning. There's a formal programme, I don't know, Anya, if you've linked to any research from the Johns Hopkins University in the States, and they have a programme called TIPS, which is Teachers Involve Parents in Schools. And it's a formal programme in as much that teachers actually have to write down a topic that they've been doing with the child in secondary school, whether it's science, whatever. The child must go home and talk about that topic to their parents, and then they actually have to sign off that they've had a conversation about it. Now that's fairly prescriptive, but it actually does value the importance of having... Now you don't need to know anything about that science. You don't need to know anything at the level that the child, but you need to be able to listen and talk, and there's some prompt questions within that programme that parents... Now, but I think for me, the most important thing that we can do as parents is talk to children about their learning. Reading is vitally important, and having, you know, access to books and literacy around the home is obviously hugely valuable, and literacy is one of the areas in Scotland that we must improve on. It's one of the areas that we must make a difference, and I know that you've also got your own literacy strategy here. But literacy is also about talking and understanding language, and that's the most important thing for me that parents can do.
Could I just add to that? My constituency runs from the other side of the river. I once tried to describe it to somebody who thought it was all Dublin 4 and full of people sipping canapes and drinks. I described it as it runs from Skid Row to Embassy Row, all of the inner city area. And some families never sit down and have a meal together and talk to each other. I think one parents could do is to say, at least on Sunday we'll all sit down and eat together, not with the tray on our laps watching television. And then, just as you say, Lorraine, just talk about anything. And if there's 3 or 4 people there, encourage a discussion, even an argument. My own father, who was the father of 6 children, 7, but one of them died at infancy, used to preside over a table when you had your dinner in the middle of the day on a Sunday. It took us 20 minutes to finish the food and 2 hours to conclude the argument. And he would sort of sit there, and he was a man of very strong opinions, but he would say, let him finish, to my older or younger brothers, and the unstated thing is, and when he's made a complete idiot of himself, then you can take him out. So it is, certainly just from my own experience, I think families talking and eating together, it's so basic, and the television has destroyed it in some places.
Thank you. Now, the next question to the Minister. Given our drive towards a knowledge economy, what are the future plans with regard to exceptionally able children?
That's a very big challenge, and I don't have a response, to be honest with you. But I do know of some children who were the objects of bullying because they were brighter than other people in their classroom, and they were the sort of me sir kind of person who knew the answer to a lot of questions. And in one case, I'm speaking about a neighbour and the son of a neighbour of friends of ours. The young man in question, he's now in first year university, but he retreated into himself and was, in a sense, bullied for those sort of reasons. I would be very open to ideas and suggestions as to what we can do. I simply just don't know. I don't have any expertise in the area, but I do recognise it is a problem.
Thank you. Lorraine, as a parent of a child with special needs, how did you get you and your views, your ideas welcomed in your child's school when your child is viewed as his or her education is viewed as additional work that the teacher does not wish to undertake?
I think a conference on additional support needs would take up a whole other day, and we talked about, I've got my own views about support assistance being velcroed to a child actually, in terms of the impact that has on the child. And but in terms of, I mean, I mentioned very briefly at the beginning of my presentation, but it was a very powerful catalyst for me to become involved in parental involvement, having a child with additional support needs, and feeling as if I was out with her education, and how did I actually get in to be part of that education and to work alongside the teachers and the schools who were actually charged with providing that education for her. And I know with my dealings with many parents around additional support needs over the years, that's how we feel. You know, you feel as if it's very difficult to be treated as an equal partner and to be there and have your views heard. So I'm very passionate about that area, but one of the things that I fundamentally think is important is to build up the relationships. You cannot achieve what you want for your child, particularly a child who has very extensive needs, if your relationship has broken down with the school and with the teachers. And sadly, that is what happens, because it's very emotional. It's very challenging to have a child at home that has, you know, particularly a high level of need as well, and the impact on the family. But the relationship to me is I had to make sure, now not all parents have the resources that I have, but I had to make sure that those teachers did not feel threatened, that they did not feel that I was about to come in and cause a huge amount of difficulty for them. It was about my child, and bringing the focus back to the child all the time, and I mentioned that in my presentation. To me, that's what parental involvement is all about. It's about our children. So, you know, keeping that at the heart of the discussion, as opposed to how you feel as a parent and how difficult that is, I think is quite hard. But I think that's the most important thing to me, is to build that relationship. Once you have the relationship, you can usually tackle most problems. And I've had problems along the way. My daughter's changed school, you know, against the wishes of us, to another school that we would have preferred her not to go to. But, you know, we've managed to overcome those things, and we still have a relationship with the school, and I think that's really, really important. Sorry. Rory, were you going to add something to that? No.
Minister, what is the Minister's position on school fees, charges for school administration, photocopying, art and craft supplies, etc.? Are they compulsory? Are they legally enforceable? Can school principals, boards of management pursue parents for such contributions? We are aware of a lot of problems in this area. I made reference in my scripted remarks to the enrolment policy. There was a document circulated last June, approximately. A draft document prepared in the department in the schools section. We got back a large number of responses at the end of the mid-term break of last November. And that's now been processed, and I had a working meeting with the people directly involved about 10 days ago on the enrolment policy. And it deals with, and we will be dealing with in legislation, with the issues that you're talking about. Specifically, to answer the questions as I understood them,
We will not. It is not permitted in the free scheme area at primary school and certainly at secondary school that there is a compulsory voluntary contribution, which is self-evidently a contradiction. It's just not part of the law, and parents are not obliged to pay it. We'll be making this much clearer. We'll be saying that every school will have to have an enrolment policy. It'll have to deal with issues like this. It will have to make that policy available to parents and to third parties who might be interested in the school, make it available in an accessible form and not just a website, because not everybody has easy access to the website. So hard copies, in my view, would certainly be something that would need to be there. And it will deal seriatim with all those kinds of issues that you've raised. But that is the situation. And I really don't have anything.
That's it. Thank you. Just in the interest of trying to get as many questions as possible in a very short time, I'm going to ask both the Minister and Lorraine one question, but if we could answer it really shortly, because we are coming up to lunch. Lorraine, how is the curriculum devised and who sets the objectives? I don't know whether you can answer that shortly, but...
We haven't had we don't have a curriculum in legislation in Scotland. What we have done is we've changed our curriculum over the last few years, as I mentioned. We used to have what was called a 5 to 14 curriculum, which set down guidelines for schools and teachers, and we've changed those guidelines. So the Scottish Government and our education body, Education Scotland, developed the guidelines for teachers, and it prescribes the curricular areas that all children must cover in school, and it prescribes all the experiences within those curricular areas that children must experience up to the age of 15. And then we have an examination system. So we provide guidelines. It's up to our schools and our local authorities, which is our regions, to actually interpret that, and they have quite a bit of flexibility as to, and one of the challenges we have in Scotland, and I'm trying to be brief here, but is that balance between flexibility that we've given our schools and our teachers against nationally prescribed guidelines. So some people are saying it's far too woolly and too open, and other teachers saying that's exactly what we need to be able to provide the education for our children and our own school community. So we've got that argument going on in Scotland just now against prescription and flexibility. But we have got guidance, but it's not prescribed in detail.
Thank you. And the last question to the Minister. Could you consider the primary-secondary cycle disconnections, how it may be alleviated for children moving to completely different schools, and how dispersion of children from their peers may be reduced?
Part of that relates to the enrolment policy and what are the traditional feeder schools from primary into a secondary. Very complex. We will be proposing inter alia that we will say to the schools at the second level, here are the things that you cannot put into your enrolment policy, rather than trying to be prescriptive for everything. So we're going to identify the things that are unacceptable. The big issue is really 80% of our schools have no capacity problem. In other words, they can provide a place at second level for 80% of them. And we're talking about a cohort population in total over the 6 years of 350,000. So, but with the 20%, there is a big problem. And there's a big problem in primary school as well. And in my own area, for example, there's an excellent girls' school in the state system, but if you don't actually put your daughter's name down for the school after the scan has confirmed that it is a female, you're in trouble. And I had a neighbour constituent who had come from Cork, wasn't aware of any of this difficulty, and went to put her child's name down when she was 6 or 7 in the primary school, and was told she'd be on a waiting list, but there's no guarantee. So that is a big problem, and we're just going to have to look at capacity and how we provide for it. We are in a very fortunate position in that, unlike most of the rest of Europe, and certainly Northern Europe, we are looking at, in round figures, a 10% increase in the school-going population over the next 8 or 9 years. and that's good news for all of us, but it does create real challenges in terms of providing additional accommodation and capacity.
Thank you.